Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree introduced over 100 new weapons, and among them are the Smithscript weapons. These are special in that they're non-consumable throwing weapons, meaning there's no limit to how many you can throw. The Smithscript Dagger is by far the weakest, being the fastest but also having the lowest damage. There's really no reason to use it over the others. So today, I'm gonna try to beat the entire DLC with only this weapon. But because of how much range I'll have, at this point, I wasn't expecting this challenge to be that bad. Right? Let's get into the rules. I will only be allowed to use the Smithscript Dagger to attack, and it's the only weapon I'll be allowed to equip. Shields and so are not allowed. I am allowed to use Torrent, my 2 Sacred Flasks, and my Flask of Wondrous Physic, but I won't be allowing any cracked tears that raise my damage, and especially not Exploding Physic, even if it is very funny. That means I won't be using Talismans, Armor, Spirit Ashes, Great Runes, any other Ashes of War, or any consumables, of course excluding the Flasks. I also won't allow summoning NPCs, since at this point why not? Finally, I will allow enemies to be killed by natural hazards, since I can't really control that. Also, I hid 3 skulls in the video. If you find them all, I'll give you a shout out. And as usual, congrats to Trey3 for finding the skulls last time. Apparently I just can't beat him. Anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say. Let's get into the challenge. So after starting a new save file and playing for like 10 hours, I realized that I already have a save at level 150 that I used for a previous challenge, so I just used that to enter the DLC. Now at this point, I don't have anything to attack with, so all I can really do is run and hope for the best. I think I'm in the clear. The Smithscript Dagger lies in the ruined forged lava intake, which luckily is pretty early on in the DLC and isn't blocked by any bosses. I grab a couple Scadutree fragments along the way, which for those who haven't played the DLC, grabbing enough of them allows you to raise your attack and defense permanently. I grab my trusty dagger, upgrade it to max level, and respec my stats at Renala so I can use it better. I make all my stats around 30, removing points in Vigor, Dex, and Strength to put into my Faith, Intelligence, and Mind. We'll get into the details on how this weapon works a tiny bit later. For now I head towards Castle Ensis. Also, just as a warning, this was my first time playing the DLC. I have no idea where I'm going. Anyway, in these types of challenges, running past everything is usually the best strategy. And for the beginning of Castle Ensis, this is no different. That is, until I reach this area. This area is extremely long and filled with strong enemies, including this dog that can hit me even when I'm running away. Once I get past all these dogs in this cave, I need to get past all these guards, these zombie sorcerers, and these wizards before I can get a break. After a while of trying and failing to get past this area, I decide to instead lure the enemies one by one down this ladder, where they're a lot easier to deal with. Which did work, but also took like 20 minutes and I just died anyway, which sucked.
Okay, man.
But I eventually find out that I actually opened this door next to the site of grace really early on, and I just never noticed. Which is the problem with streaming to 0 people. No one can tell me when I'm being an idiot. So, shameless plug aside, it turns out running past everything was the solution, since the dog's AI is horrible at getting through narrow areas, and I can also lure this guy down here so I don't have to deal with him. With that done, I can pretty much avoid everything else, and so we make it to the first boss. The boss here is Rolana, Twin Moon Knight. So my damage here is, worrying to say the least. I also learn here that this weapon is so much worse than I thought it was. Oh my god. For being a throwing knife, the range is comically short. It has pretty much the same range as the whip, which is pretty much a complete upgrade. So, editing Frank here. Its range was actually just buffed. So keep in mind that for this challenge, its range is way shorter than it is right now. Anyway, the Ash of War on this weapon kinda helps with the poor range. Not really though. It's a much slower knife throw that does a bit more damage than a normal attack, and does go a lot farther, but it somehow still has range issues. It's still pretty bad for the most part. Also, I'm pretty much forced to two-hand the weapon to get the 50% damage boost from doing so. But for some reason, the 2 knives don't go to the same place. The second hit will miss extremely often when doing a light attack. And don't even try using the charged attack, since the second knife gets thrown completely off target. It'll miss pretty much anything that's not this. The damage on this weapon is somehow even worse. This weapon has worse stats than the original dagger. This is a DLC weapon. Why would they do this? I'm completely convinced this is the worst weapon in the DLC. Maybe even in the game. At least for most of the other worst weapons, they can still have some use early game. Aside from Vari's Bouquet. That thing is terrible. Anyway, Rolana. Though I do pretty low damage here, I get an opening to attack her pretty much after every one of her attacks, so it's not as long of a fight as you'd expect. After I learned how most of her attacks worked in Phase 1, the biggest problem was this magic arc attack. This attack has two variations, one which comes out pretty much immediately, and one where she charges a bit before shooting the arc. The instant one is already pretty hard to react to, especially at close range, but it also seemed much more likely that she would do the charged one, so it was always a surprise when the instant one came out. It also pretty much always one-shot me due to my low defense and vigor, but also sometimes didn't. I don't know. If my reaction time's on point though, this isn't that much of an issue. I eventually respec again, removing a bunch of points from my mana bar to put into my dexterity, since in this fight, my Asher War isn't that useful. Or really in general, I guess. Anyway, that raises my damage by a noticeable amount. Soon enough, I'm able to reach Phase 2. This phase has a bunch of changes, including a bunch of new attacks. The most notable is this one where she shoots 5 arcs in a row. What makes this attack difficult to dodge is that the third arc gets shot slightly later than the first two. You need to delay your dodge by a split second. One of her other attacks becomes a lot more problematic, being this one where she summons a bunch of homing daggers, and then dashes up and attacks with her swords. She summons way more daggers here than in the first phase, and even though it felt like I was dodging at the same time, it felt way harder to dodge in Phase 2. And of course, if both hits connect, I get one shot. My physic does help. I'm using the Opaline Hard Tier and Bubble Tier, which for 3 minutes, tanks one hit for me and also raises my defense by 15%. Given the second phase lasts 10 minutes, it's not that useful, but it's better than nothing. Her final attack that gave me trouble occurs once she reaches 25% of her health. This is pretty easy to avoid by just timing some jumps, but once she reaches around an eighth of her health, she'll do the attack again, but first summon some homing daggers. You have to outmaneuver the daggers, since if you try to roll through them, you'll get hit by the actual attack. I honestly have no clue how to consistently avoid this, but once I got to this point the second time, I somehow avoided it completely by accident, and then went on to beat the fight, after a 14-minute battle. Well, that's lucky. After defeating Rolana, I head on through Scadu Altus, and I'm immediately sent into another boss, the Golden Hippopotamus. My damage here is even lower than when fighting Rolana, and as you'd expect, pretty much anything he can do one-shots me. The dodge timings for some attacks is also extremely strict. The hitbox on this grab attack in particular was the most egregious, with it reaching far behind his mouth. Also patched. If I do dodge it though, I get enough time to use 2 Ashes of War, for pretty respectable damage. Phase 1 isn't too bad though. Aside from his grab attack, all of his other attacks are pretty consistent to dodge. The only other attack that gave me trouble was this leaping attack, since it's so quick. But he winds up for a bit before leaping, so with enough practice it's not too much of a problem. On the other hand, I can't say the same about Phase 2. He gains 4 new attacks here, all of them being at least a bit of a problem. The first one is where he summons a bunch of needles to fall from the sky. Most of the time, I can avoid this by dodging in either direction. But since the needles fall in random bursts, it can sometimes hit me if I'm unlucky, dealing a solid chunk of my health. The second attack is his jumping attack he can do. For some reason, it feels pretty much impossible to avoid at certain ranges. But thankfully, by running forward when the attack starts, it makes it way easier to dodge, or can even avoid the attack entirely. The third attack is where he spins around, shooting off a bunch of needles. If you're in the right position, dodging to the right will avoid the attack entirely, but if not, you need to do a pretty precise dodge. With 9 healing flasks though, getting hit by this isn't that bad. The final attack is the real problem. This is an extension to his leaping attack. After leaping once, he'll slide across the ground, and then do another one. This second one is the real issue. A lot of the time, I'll be right next to him when he does this. Since I'm so close, I can't react to the leap itself, and I need to time my dodge perfectly, since the hippo's whole body is a hitbox. Of course, a mistimed dodge is just death. Your timing really has to be perfect in this fight, since otherwise you're probably gonna get hit, and in this fight you know what that means. But eventually, after almost 100 deaths, and a 7-minute fight, I defeat the Golden Hippopotamus. Nice. The rest of Shadowkeep can pretty much all be run past, until I reach the Specimen Storehouse. God, I hate this area. It's filled with these shadow undead, which shoot this fireball which stalls in the air for a bit before actually moving, which I could just never avoid for the life of me. It also took me forever to find out you're supposed to jump onto this statue to get to the top floor, so I was here for like half an hour just running around aimlessly since this area is filled with dead ends. Eventually I make it to the next boss, and with this guy's reputation, this was gonna be fun. The boss here is Mesmer the Impaler. Mesmer the Impaler certainly earns his reputation. He has many long attack strings, and a mistimed dodge here is usually just death. Of course, my damage is still low. One of his most used attacks is this spinning slash, which one-shots me at close range, and also shoots out flames which heavily damage me. There's 3 situations where he can use this attack. Firstly, and most rarely, he can back away with it. It doesn't have any extensions this way, so this version is the least problematic. Second, he will always use it after this other slash attack, which also sends out fire. The hitbox on this specific fire is a lot bigger than it seems, so you have to dodge right before getting hit. Right after, he'll do the spinning slash. Now, the actual slash is pretty easy to avoid. The problem is what happens after. At this point, if you're far away from him, he'll do a rising attack and then stab the ground. On the other hand, if you're right next to him, he'll first do another spinning slash, so you need to delay your dodge for a bit so you don't get killed. He then finishes with the same attacks as before. For some reason, which version he does is pretty inconsistent, but since the rising attack does barely any damage anyway, it's not that big of a deal. Finally, he can use it during this string. This string has 2 variations. Firstly, in the middle of the attack, he can do 2 stabs into a final delayed stab. This is pretty easy to avoid, and lets me get a couple hits in. Second, instead of doing the quick stabs, he can do the spinning slash, and then follow up with a delayed stabbing attack. This needs to be dodged perfectly, since the hitbox lingers for a long time. You really need to be paying attention to know what he'll do after using this attack, and this is only one attack. It says a lot about the difficulty of this fight. Once Mesmer reaches around 80% of his health, he gains access to Mesmer's Fury. Think of this like Waterfowl Dance, but fair. Naturally, there's 2 variations of this attack. The first one has him rise up into the air, do a spinning slash, do a flurry of attacks, slam on the ground, and finally summon a bunch of spears from the ground. This is the easier one to avoid. The flurry of stabs is the trickiest part, but it's pretty consistent to dodge if you dodge toward Mesmer, as the attack will go over your head. With enough practice, dodging the whole thing isn't too difficult. The second variation is where he immediately does a bunch of spinning slashes in a row, moving around the arena. Every slash here except for one is a one-shot. To dodge this, you need to roll when the attack starts, and immediately roll backward. He'll then do the rising attack into the stab, which we already know how to avoid. When I say you need to roll when the attack starts, I mean immediately once he jumps in the air. Any hesitation and you won't have time to dodge the final slash, which means a restart. He can also use Mesmer's Fury after this double slash attack, and for some reason, this way the second variation felt a lot harder to avoid. I kept on getting hit by one of the slashes in the middle, which usually missed me entirely. Thankfully, it doesn't kill me, so if I get hit, it's not the worst thing in the world. The animations are pretty similar for the 2 versions, but thankfully, the first variation is slow enough so that you won't get killed if you anticipate the second. Most of my deaths in this fight were in Phase 1, and I'm sure you can tell why. There's quite a bit to learn, especially just 2 days after the DLC released. With enough practice, though, Phase 2 is reachable. His old moves aren't really changed here, with the main difference being his new attacks. He gains the ability to attack with a giant snake, and this is what really makes Phase 2 so much harder. Though in comparison to his other attacks, the snake attacks do relatively low damage, he gets a couple of really tricky strings in this phase. The problem with them is that their animations are very similar, the first one having the snake more on the left, and the second one having the snake more to the right. The dodge timings on these are pretty strict, so you need to know immediately which one he's doing. The right string also finishes with this slam attack, which because it creates a shockwave, has an extremely strict dodge timing. But once those attacks are figured out, Phase 2 is not that much harder than Phase 1. Even the extra attack here is pretty easy to avoid, since by rolling away, you only have to dodge a single snake. Mesmer is a fight where his attacks on their own aren't that difficult to avoid, but if you want to stand a chance, you need to know exactly what he's doing. Any mistakes here, and you'll have to try again. But eventually, after an ungodly amount of tries, and a 10-minute fight, I finally defeat Mesmer the Impaler. Alright, that took long enough. With Mesmer finally defeated, I head into the ancient ruins of Ro. I grab a couple Scadutree fragments here, and then somehow get so lost I end up in Cerulean Coast of all places, grabbing more Scadutree fragments along the way. I managed to get all the way to +11 from the +7 I had at Mesmer. I was lost, okay? I eventually make it to the next boss, and from what I saw online, I expected this boss to be pretty easy. But even with my extra Scadutree buffs, and the fact that this boss is weak to Pierce, I was still doing absurdly low damage and was taking huge damage. I guess I don't know what I was expecting. Ramina, Saint of the Bud, only has a couple problematic attacks. The first one is this spinning attack. The problem here is that you need to dodge the first attack extremely early, since otherwise, you won't have time to dodge the other hits. I've had practice though, so it wasn't so bad. Her other problematic attack, and the one that actually makes the fight a bit difficult, is this string. The problem is that the last two hits are so close together that you actually can't dodge both. You need to make one of them miss. By dodging the first hit to the left, the second hit will miss. Most of the time. Even if you do get hit though, the second hit doesn't do that much damage, so it's not that big of a deal. Ramina also doesn't have a phase 2, instead getting 2 new attacks. Once you know what to do, these are pretty easy to dodge, but they will usually kill me if I make any mistakes. Overall, this isn't that hard of a fight. I defeat her in just over 80 tries, after a 10-minute fight. Nice. Two bosses left. With Ramina defeated, we reach the final area of Shadow of the Erdtree. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know how to pronounce that. Anir Alim. This is the hardest area in the DLC, having some of the strongest enemies in the entire game. As usual, running past everything is the only feasible strategy. The enemies here are far too difficult for me to deal with, especially all in a row like this. I actually make it to the boss pretty quickly, and gosh, I think this might be my least favorite fight, and that's the end of my sentence. I hate this fight. In this fight, Needle Knight Letta realizes that you're not actually on their side, and you need to fight her and 2 of her allies in a row. And just let me rant a bit about this fight. Unlike every required boss in the game, this fight is against human characters, meaning they aren't like other bosses where, you know, dodging an attack lets you hit them. No, since they share my moveset, they get the same invincible roll that I do, which they can just do after using an attack. Their AI is also completely unfair, since they will automatically dodge when I attack them. I can only hit them with a precise punish, or if they let me. And for some reason, they're ridiculously bulky, and the last 2 can also heal once they reach half health. The biggest problem is how multiple are attacking me at the same time. It's like a Godskin duo, but at least they kinda tried in that fight. There is no synergy between these enemies. They kinda just spawn in and do their thing. Anyway, the first NPC that spawns is Hornsent, who is the most frail and also has the most punishable attacks. He has this Ghost Flame attack that lets me hit him a bunch of times, and I need for him to do this at least twice before the next NPC, Dryleaf Dane, spawns. And this guy's just the worst. He's extremely aggressive, so I don't get many chances to attack Hornsent while he's in the arena. I need for Hornsent to be at low enough health so I can slowly kill him off before the final NPC spawns. This final NPC is Needle Knight Letta. She'll spawn in soon after I kill Hornsent, and this is where the fight truly becomes hell. Dryleaf Dane is far more aggressive than Letta, and also less bulky, so killing him first is really the only feasible strategy. The problem is that Dane only has a couple attacks I can punish him for using. He already doesn't use these that often, but if Letta is anywhere close, it'd be too risky to try and attack him, even if I did have the chance. And if I attack him even a bit too late, Dane will have the chance to roll out of the way. What ends up happening is almost an hour of me constantly running away, waiting for the chance to get a single hit in. And if I ever get hit by Letta over this whole time, have fun doing the whole thing again. If I do manage to defeat Dane, Letta has even more health. Granted, it's a lot easier without Dane, but the thought that messing up means I have to go through another 50 minutes of this doesn't help me in staying focused. Letta has 2 attacks I can punish her for using, being her jumping attack and her running attack. There's not a huge window to hit her in, but since Dane is gone I get more chances to attack her. I also need to watch out for this needle summon attack, since if I ever mistime my dodge, I have to restart. I really need to play it extremely safe. But eventually, after a 50-minute fight, I take down Needle Knight Leda.
Oh my god, dude.
This fight broke me, okay? Don't make fun of me. And with that, we make it to the final boss of Shadow of the Erdtree. The boss here is promised consort Radon. Radon's phase 1, aside from one attack, isn't actually that bad. He's surprisingly passive, so it's not that hard to get to phase 2 by running away from him and abusing my Ash of War. We'll talk about phase 2 a tiny bit later. Before that, I want to talk about his cross-slash attack. From what I know, this attack is not avoidable. I'm not kidding. Except in extremely specific cases, once he decides to do this, you're gonna get hit. This is because the second slash is close enough to the first that you will never have time to dodge again without being hit. At least not with a human reaction time. The second hit also has huge range and tracking, so dodging back won't help you. The only solution I found to this attack is using this normally completely useless block you get from two-handing a weapon. Unlike a dodge, this doesn't have any end lag after blocking something, so I'll be able to dodge after blocking the first hit. This almost halves my damage taken, which is better than nothing, but it isn't enough. If I have low stamina, I can no longer block, since I'll get staggered, and if I get unlucky, he can drain my potions enough so that phase 2 would be pretty much impossible. It doesn't end there, cause why would it? Well, this attack is pretty fast. Not absurdly fast, but it comes out in 35 frames, which is well above the average human's reaction time, but he also has another attack that comes out in around the same time. It's easy to react to something in 35 frames, but actually distinguishing the difference between two things is a completely different story. Especially when he has attacks like this which block my vision of what he's doing. Because of my low defense, blocking his other fast attack will also make me take barely enough damage to kill me after blocking anything else. And since I need as many flasks as possible for phase 2, blocking it isn't really a sustainable option. Finally, if I don't react in time to the cross slash, it's pretty much a one-shot. It's technically possible to dodge the second hit after getting hit by the first, but it's so precise it might as well be a restart. But if I manage to get past that without losing too many potions, it's time for phase 2. This phase, to put it lightly, is absurd. All of his sword attacks summon huge lasers, so adopting the same passive strategy as phase 1 isn't doable. You need to learn how to fight this guy point blank, with his animations being even harder to distinguish to even have a chance. Of course, this makes the cross-slash attack even more problematic. Most of his attacks also combo into the lasers, so pretty much anything that didn't one-shot me before, now does. Not to mention, the lasers block my vision of what he's doing, so good luck distinguishing between the cross-slash and his other fast attack. Your dodges also have to be absolutely perfect. Dodging an attack with any change to timing will have you get hit. This fight alone took longer than some entire challenges I did, and I think that says all I need to about this fight. You need to know it like the back of your hand if you want to stand a chance. Well, And after a 10-minute fight, and almost 20 hours of tries, I defeat the Shadow of the Erdtree with only the throwing dagger. Not risking anything. Oh my god. Please don't be a phase 3. Oh my god, let's go, dude. Finally, man. And with that, yes, you can beat Elden Ring's DLC with only the throwing dagger. But just don't, for Radon alone. Making this fight hard is one thing, but putting in an unavoidable attack? Not it, FromSoft. There is way too much to talk about in this fight to do it in this video, so I'll be uploading a Radon boss fight guide in the future. Be sure to check that out. And of course, thank you for watching. I put a lot of work into these silly videos, so be sure to like and subscribe and all that. Hopefully you'll come by to watch me suffer again sometime in the future. Outro.
Shh. Using my suffer again quote?
No.
You better fix that, boy.
No, I said hopefully you'll come watch me suffer again in the future.
Suffer? I feel like I've copyright claimed that piece of material, dear boy.
I think I suffer more than you in my videos.
You do? But I see, that's the thing about patents, alright?